unaware the pregnant wife he divorced was the secret owner of his front company. Now the Mafia boss works for her. The night Rodney Carr poured expensive wine over Lexi Spence's pregnant ex-wife Lillian at their private dinner should have been the final humiliation of the woman Lexi had divorced 6 months ago for being too soft, too ordinary, too much of a liability. But what Lexi didn't know, what his trusted advisor Rodney didn't know, what his new girlfriend in the glittering dress didn't know as they laughed and filmed the wine dripping down Lillian's face and soaking her 5-month baby bump, was that the pregnant wife Lexi had divorced was actually Lillian Brooks, the secret owner of Spence Security Solutions, the so-called legitimate front company that laundered Lexi's entire criminal empire. Every dollar Rodney received as his financial consultant, every payment his crew collected for protection, every asset Lexi believed he owned as the boss of his operation, every property his new girlfriend enjoyed as the mistress of a powerful man, all of it flowed through the company the pregnant wife Lexi divorced actually owned, the company that funded the very penthouse where Rodney had just poured wine on the pregnant billionaire owner, where Lexi and his girlfriend laughed at the woman who controlled their financial infrastructure, where the entire crew mocked the phantom owner they were completely unaware was standing dripping in their dining room, carrying Lexi's child. But Lillian didn't scream or cry as the wine and its sediment slid down her simple white dress onto the marble floor of her own company's penthouse. She just placed one hand protectively over the baby bump Rodney had called a burden, pulled out her phone with the other, and made a single quiet call that would devastate Rodney, shock Lexi to his core, and destroy everything his entire criminal empire had built on the corporate structure of the pregnant wife he'd divorced without ever knowing who she really was. So what was Lillian about to do to the woman who just poured wine on a pregnant billionaire? How would Lexi react when he discovered the pregnant wife he divorced owned the front company his entire operation depended on? Why was one of his young associates suddenly screaming, "No, Elena, please don't"? Not them too. As if he'd witnessed this exact devastation before? And what did the new girlfriend not know about the penthouse she was living in, and the pregnant wife she just laughed at while Rodney poured that wine? Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The penthouse in Lower Manhattan had always represented everything Lexi Spence believed he deserved. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, custom Italian furniture arranged with precision, original artwork that cost more than most people earned in a year, the kind of place that announced power to anyone who walked through the door. And tonight, surrounded by his inner circle at the sleek dining table, Lexi had felt untouchable, in control, ready to handle the Lillian problem once and for all. He'd invited his former wife under the pretense of discussing the baby's future, but Lexi's real plan was simpler, crueler. He wanted Lillian to sign papers giving up any claim to his life, his resources, his world. He wanted her gone, erased, like she'd never existed. Lillian had arrived exactly on time, wearing that same plain white dress she always wore. No jewelry except a simple gold band on her right hand, no makeup, hair pulled back in a basic ponytail. Everything about her screamed ordinary, forgettable, beneath them. Rodney Carr had felt vindicated just looking at her. This was the woman Lexi had wasted 3 years on, this plain, quiet nobody who couldn't even dress properly for a dinner with dangerous people. Lexi sat at the table next to his new girlfriend, and the contrast was stunning. She wore a designer dress that hugged every curve, diamond earrings that caught the candlelight, that gorgeous necklace Lexi had given her last month. She looked like ambition, like power, like everything Lillian had never been. His associates sat around the table in expensive suits, looking every inch the successful criminals they'd worked years to become. Men with neck tattoos barely hidden by designer collars. Men who commanded respect through fear and violence. Men who lived in a world where weakness meant death. Even the young associate who handled financial logistics looked sharp despite his nervous energy. And then there was Lillian. Simple, plain, pregnant, standing in their penthouse like she didn't belong, because she didn't. Rodney had felt a surge of righteousness as she stood from the table. They'd been drinking expensive wine all evening, and a half-empty decanter still sat near her place setting, deep red liquid that cost more per bottle than most people's rent. And as she looked at Lillian standing there with that slight swell in her belly, that baby bump that Lexi wanted nothing to do with, something inside Rodney had snapped. This girl had tried to trap Lexi, had tried to use pregnancy to keep her hooks in him when he'd clearly moved on to someone better, had shown up at their home acting like she still had rights, still had a place, still mattered. Someone needed to show Lillian her place. Someone needed to make her understand that she meant nothing to them, that her baby meant nothing, that she was nothing but a liability they'd already cut loose. Rodney had reached for that crystal decanter with both hands, marched over to where Lillian stood by the window, and without hesitation, without mercy, poured every drop over Lillian's head. The wine cascaded down Lillian's face like a waterfall of contempt. It soaked her dark hair, ran down her simple white dress in rivers of crimson, pooled at her feet on the pristine marble floor. The smell of oak and tannins filled the air, expensive and suffocating. The sound of liquid splashing seemed to echo through the suddenly silent penthouse. Wine dripped from Lillian's chin, from her fingertips, from the ends of her hair, stained her white dress purple, made her look like a victim of violence, which in a way, she was. And then the new girlfriend started laughing. Loud, delighted laughter that filled the room like breaking glass. She'd pulled out her phone already, filming, capturing every second of Lillian standing there dripping, humiliated, destroyed. Oh my God. She gasped between laughs. This is perfect. This is exactly what she deserves. Lexi, babe. Rodney is savage. I love it. Lexi had joined in the laughter then, his face flushing with something that looked like relief, like he'd been waiting for permission to fully reject Lillian, and Rodney had just given it to him. Rodney, that's brutal, he'd said, but he was grinning. But yeah, maybe she'll get the message now. Maybe she'll finally understand that we don't want her here. Don't want her baby. Don't want any reminder that she ever existed. His associates said nothing, but Lexi saw approval in their eyes. The kind of grim satisfaction that came from watching weakness being punished. Rodney set the empty decanter down with a satisfying clink, feeling righteous and powerful. There, she'd said, her voice sharp with vindication. Now you know what we think of you, Lillian. Now you understand your place. You're nothing. Your baby is nothing. And you need to leave our world alone. But Lillian hadn't reacted the way Rodney expected. She hadn't cried or run away or begged for mercy. She just stood there, wine dripping from her hair, staining her white dress, and placed one hand protectively over her stomach. The other hand reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and she smiled. That strange, knowing smile that made Rodney's stomach suddenly clench with inexplicable dread. Something was wrong. Something in Lillian's eyes. In the way she held herself despite the humiliation. In the absolute calm on her face as wine dripped onto the marble floor. And then the young associate screamed. The financial guy, the one who'd been sitting quietly in the corner all night, suddenly stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. No, 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 Lillian, please, please don't do this. I'm begging you. Lexi spun toward him, confusion spiking into irritation. What are you talking about? Sit down. But the young man was shaking now, real fear in his eyes, his hands trembling as he stared at Lillian with pure terror. She's going to destroy us, just like Chen destroyed the Volkov family. Oh God, Lexi. What did you do? What did Rodney do? What is he talking about? One of the other associates demanded, moving toward the panicking man. Explain yourself right now. But the young associate couldn't speak anymore, could only stare at Lillian while she pressed a single button on her phone and brought it to her ear. Hello, Lillian said, her voice calm and clear despite the wine still dripping from her chin. Yes, it's time. Initiate the Phantom Protocol for Spence Security Solutions. All of them. Effective immediately. The name Chen hit the room like a gunshot. Lexi felt his blood turn to ice because he knew that name. Everyone in their world knew that name. Victor Chen. The corporate attorney who'd destroyed the Volkov crime family 6 months ago by dismantling their financial infrastructure overnight. Victor Chen. The lawyer who'd disappeared the Cortez cartel's assets and left them vulnerable to federal prosecution. Victor Chen. The ghost who could make entire criminal empires vanish by pulling the right legal strings. And now Lillian was calling someone about a protocol. Like she'd planned this. Like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. Who are you calling? Rodney demanded, her voice shrill with confusion that was rapidly morphing into fear. What protocol? What are you talking about? Lillian lowered her phone slowly, deliberately, her eyes moving across each of their faces. Lexi felt pinned under that gaze, saw something in her expression he'd never noticed in 3 years of marriage. Power. Authority. The kind of quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself because it already knew its own weight. I'm calling my attorney, Lillian said simply. Victor Chen. The man who handles corporate restructuring for Brooks Holdings, the parent company that owns Spence Security Solutions. The room tilted. Lexi heard Rodney gasp, heard his associates make strangled sounds, heard his girlfriend's phone clatter to the floor. Your attorney? Lexi heard himself whisper. Victor Chen is your attorney. Brooks Holdings. Brooks Holdings technically, Lillian corrected, her hand still resting protectively on her stomach. The legitimate business consultancy my late father built before he died. I inherited it 8 years ago, along with all its subsidiary companies and shell corporations, including the one you know as Spence Security Solutions. The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. Spence Security Solutions was his front company, where he laundered money, where his crew got paid, where every illegal dollar got cleaned and legitimized. Spence Security Solutions, the company that owned this penthouse, that held the deeds to his safe houses, that employed everyone in this room on paper. Spence Security Solutions, the corporate infrastructure that kept him out of federal prison. You don't own that company, Lexi said, his voice sounding distant and strange. I own that company. I built it. Lillian's smile was sad, almost pitying. No, Lexi. You never owned anything. You used my company, with my permission. For 3 years, I documented every transaction, every payment, every crime, waiting to see if you'd choose differently, if you'd choose us, choose our child, over this life. She gestured at the wine staining her dress, at the laughing girlfriend, at Rodney standing frozen with the empty decanter. Tonight you made your choice. Now I'm making mine. The penthouse stretched out like a kingdom above the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows framing Manhattan's glittering skyline like a portrait of power itself. This was Lexi Spence's domain, and everyone in it knew exactly what that meant. The dining room gleamed with the kind of luxury that came from years of carefully laundered money. Custom Italian furniture, crystal that caught the candlelight, artwork that whispered of connections most people could only imagine. Lexi sat at the head of the table in his tailored white shirt, sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal the tattoos crawling up his forearms, reminders of a past that made men nervous and women curious. His associates flanked him in expensive suits that barely contained their dangerous energy, men who'd earned their places through loyalty and violence. Rodney Carr presided over the scene in her emerald lace gown, every inch the sophisticated advisor, the woman who'd helped build this empire from street-level operations to corporate legitimacy. And then there was the girlfriend, draped across the chair beside Lexi in a glittering dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, laughing at something one of the men said, her diamond earrings catching the light with every movement. They were a tableau of success, of power, of people who'd clawed their way up and refused to apologize for it. And standing near the window, looking painfully out of place, was Lillian, heavily pregnant, wrapped in a simple white dress that seemed almost childish against the sophistication surrounding her. No jewelry except that plain gold band, no makeup. Hair pulled back like she couldn't be bothered. Rodney felt disgust rise in her throat just looking at the girl. This was what Lexi had wasted 3 years on, this soft, sentimental creature who brought weakness into their world like a disease. Lillian represented everything Rodney despised: vulnerability, emotion, the kind of liability that got people killed or arrested. She didn't belong here, had never belonged. And tonight, Rodney would make sure she finally understood that. Rodney's fingers tightened around the stem of her wine glass as she watched Lillian standing there. So quiet, so unbearably meek in that plain white dress. 3 years this girl had been in their lives. 3 years of dragging Lexi down with her softness, her sentimentality, her complete inability to understand the world they lived in. And now she had the audacity to show up pregnant, trying to use a baby as leverage, as if a child could bridge the gap between their world and her pathetic, ordinary existence. No. Tonight ended this. Permanently. Rodney stood slowly, deliberately, her emerald gown rustling as she reached for the crystal decanter sitting on the sideboard. The wine inside was deep red. Expensive. A bottle that cost more than Lillian probably spent on clothes in a year. How fitting. The room fell silent as Rodney walked toward Lillian, heels clicking against marble, the decanter held in both hands like an offering, or a weapon. Lillian looked up, confusion flickering across her face, but she didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there with that maddening calm that made Rodney's contempt burn hotter. This moment needed to be memorable, needed to be the final humiliation that would drive this girl away forever. Rodney lifted the decanter high, tilted it slowly, deliberately, watching Lillian's eyes widen in realization. And then she poured. The wine cascaded down in a crimson flood, splashing against Lillian's dark hair, streaming down her face, soaking into that pristine white dress. The smell of oak and tannins filled the air, rich and expensive and utterly wasted. Wine pooled on the marble floor, spreading like blood, while Lillian just stood there, dripping, stunned, her hand instinctively moving to protect her swollen belly. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. The girlfriend's laughter erupted first, high and delighted, cutting through the silence like breaking glass. Her phone was already up, recording, capturing every second of Lillian standing there drenched and humiliated. "Oh my God," she gasped between laughs. "This is perfect. This is exactly what she deserves. Lexi, babe. Rodney is a savage. I love it." Lexi's face transformed as he watched. The tension he'd been carrying all evening. The guilt, maybe. The remnants of whatever he'd once felt for Lillian. It all drained away in an instant. Relief flooded his features first, then something darker, crueler. A smile spread across his face. Genuine satisfaction. This was easier than he'd expected. Disposing of his pregnant ex-wife, watching someone else do the dirty work while he got to enjoy the show. "Yeah," he said, his voice carrying that edge of vindication. Maybe now she'll finally get it. Maybe she'll finally understand we don't want her here. His associates chuckled, dark sounds of approval, exchanging glances that said they'd seen this before, knew how it ended, knew weakness when they saw it bleeding out on marble floors. But Lillian didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't run for the door like they expected. She just stood there, wine dripping from her hair, sliding down her ruined white dress, pooling at her feet. One hand moved protectively over her swollen belly, shielding the child from something none of them could see yet. The other hand rose slowly, wiping wine from her eyes with deliberate calm. And then she smiled. Small. Knowing. A smile that didn't reach her eyes at all. Her eyes stayed cold, calculating, like she was looking at people who'd already lost something they didn't know they had. And somehow, that smile was more terrifying than any tears could have been. Lillian's wine-stained fingers reached into her purse, movements slow and deliberate, like she had all the time in the world. She pulled out her phone, the screen lighting up her face, casting shadows that made her expression unreadable. The room watched, confused, uncertain why she wasn't running, wasn't begging, wasn't doing what victims were supposed to do. Lillian pressed a single contact, brought the phone to her ear, and spoke in a voice so calm it felt wrong. "Hello, Mr. Chen. Yes. It's time. Initiate the Phantom Protocol for Spent Security Solutions. All of them. Effective immediately." The name hit the room like a physical force. Chen. One of the younger associates, the financial guy who usually sat quiet in the corner, went absolutely white. His chair scraped back violently as he stood, hands shaking, eyes wide with recognition and pure terror. "Chen," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Not that Chen. Please tell me not Victor Chen." Rodney's head snapped toward him, irritation flashing across her face. "Shut up. What are you talking about? Sit down." But the young man couldn't sit, couldn't stop. Words tumbling out in fragments of panic. "Victor Chen, he's the attorney, the one who destroyed the Volkov family. He exposed their shell companies. He dismantled everything overnight. And the Cortez cartel. He made their assets disappear. Every account. Every property. Gone. They went from untouchable to federal custody in 48 hours. The laughter died. The girlfriend lowered her phone, confusion replacing her cruel amusement. Lexi's smile faded, uncertainty creeping into his eyes as he looked from his panicking associate to Lillian, still standing there dripping, still holding that phone, still wearing that terrible knowing smile. The atmosphere shifted, mockery turning to confusion, confusion bleeding into something darker, dread creeping through the room like smoke under a door. 30 minutes felt like 30 seconds. The elevator chimed, doors sliding open to reveal a distinguished Asian man in an impeccable charcoal suit. Behind him, a team of people in FBI windbreakers and others carrying briefcases marked with federal seals. Victor Chen stepped into the penthouse like he owned it, which in a way, he was about to prove someone else did. Lexi moved forward instinctively, chest out, trying to intimidate through presence alone, the way he always did. But Chen didn't even blink. He simply reached into his briefcase, pulled out a thick folder, and held it out. "Mr. Spence," Chen said, his voice clinical, detached. "Meet Lillian Brooks, also known as L. Brooks, the sole beneficial owner of Spence Security Solutions, Brooks Holdings, and the 17 shell corporations that constitute your entire financial infrastructure." The folder hit Lexi's hands, but he couldn't process it, couldn't open it, couldn't do anything but stare. Lillian stepped forward then, wine still dripping from her hair, staining her white dress purple, looking like a victim and a victor all at once. Her voice was calm, steady, like she was explaining something simple to children. "Spence Security was never your front company, Lexi. It was my company. My father built Brooks Holdings before he died, specialized in creating legitimate business structures. I inherited everything 8 years ago." She gestured at the penthouse, at the men standing frozen around the table. "I designed it as a real consultancy. You used it, with my permission, to launder your money, to create the appearance of legal income. I documented every transaction, every payment, every crime, for 3 years." She placed her hand over her belly. "I wanted to see if you'd choose differently. Choose us. Choose our child over this life." Her eyes swept the room, landing on Rodney, on the girlfriend, on each associate. "Tonight you made your choice. Now I'm making mine." Lexi's voice finally found itself. Raw. Desperate. "Why? Why would you hide this? Why would you let me think that I was ordinary?" Lillian finished, her tone almost gentle, almost sad. "Because I needed to know, Lexi. I needed to know if you could love someone you saw as ordinary." She wiped wine from her cheek, the gesture somehow dignified despite everything. "My father was Lawrence Brooks. He built an empire creating untraceable business structures for people who needed to disappear money, make things look legitimate. He died when I was 24, left me everything. Billions in assets, shell companies, corporate infrastructure most people spend lifetimes building." Her hand remained protective over her belly. "When I met you, I didn't want to be useful. I didn't want to be another asset in your criminal portfolio. I wanted to know if you could love me, just me, not what I could do for you." Lexi's face twisted, understanding dawning with horror. "So I became your wife," Lillian continued, her voice steady, clinical. "I documented 3 years, every affair, every time you came home smelling like her perfume, every dismissive comment, every moment you chose your crew over me, over us." She gestured at her pregnant form. "I gave you chances, Lexi. I told you I was pregnant. I asked you to consider leaving this life, building something legitimate, being a father." Her eyes hardened. "You divorced me instead, called me a liability, said the baby was my problem, not yours." She looked at Rodney, at the girlfriend, at the wine staining her dress. "Tonight was just confirmation. Final proof that you value cruelty over character, power over family. You chose to pour wine on a pregnant woman rather than be a father. So now you lose everything." The federal agents moved like a choreographed operation, fanning out through the penthouse with search warrants already in hand. Drawers opened, safes accessed, computers seized, every corner of Lexi's kingdom suddenly invaded by people who didn't fear him. Chen stepped forward, his voice carrying over the chaos with clinical precision. "Effective immediately. Every bank account associated with Spence Security Solutions is frozen pending federal investigation. Every account under the 17 subsidiary shell corporations, frozen." He pulled out a tablet, scrolling through documents like he was reading a grocery list. every property held in the corporate entities. This penthouse, the 3 safe houses in Brooklyn, the warehouse in Newark, the vehicles registered to the company. All of it is under Miss Brooks' direct control, and she is revoking your access as of this moment. Lexi felt the floor tilt beneath him. You can't. I need those accounts. My crew. My operations. Your crew can't be paid. Chen interrupted. Your operations can't be funded. Your legitimate facade, the one that's kept you out of federal prison for 3 years, has vanished. One of the forensic accountants approached, holding a laptop, his expression grim. We've identified multiple federal crimes, money laundering, racketeering, wire fraud, all committed using Miss Brooks' corporate infrastructure. Chen's eyes moved to Lillian, then back to Lexi. Crimes that legally implicate Miss Brooks as the beneficial owner, unless she cooperates fully with federal authorities, which she has agreed to do. The girlfriend dropped her phone, her face pale. Wait. What does that mean? It means, Chen said, every transaction you processed, every payment you facilitated, every dollar you touched. We have records, we have proof, and Miss Brooks is providing all of it to avoid prosecution herself. Rodney's emerald dress suddenly seemed too bright, too visible. You can't do this. Lillian's smile was cold, final. I already have. Chen reached into his briefcase again, this time pulling out 2 folders, one thin, one impossibly thick. He placed them on the dining table with deliberate care. Mr. Spence, you have 2 options, both drafted in explicit legal terms, both ready for your signature tonight. His finger tapped the thin folder. Option 1. You sign complete and irrevocable termination of all parental rights to Miss Brooks' unborn child. You agree to convert Spence Security Solutions into a legitimately operated business under federal oversight, with you as a salaried employee. No ownership, no control, no decision-making authority. Chen's voice never changed, never inflected, just delivered facts like a surgeon delivering diagnosis. You will cooperate with restructuring your other operations into legal enterprises. You will provide testimony when required. You will submit to regular audits. And you will never, under any circumstances, contact Miss Brooks or her child again. Lexi's hands were shaking now. Actually shaking. And if I refuse? Chen tapped the thick folder. Option 2. Miss Brooks releases 7 years of financial records, documented communications, recorded conversations, video evidence, and detailed criminal activity logs to federal prosecutors. He opened the folder slightly, revealing hundreds of pages. Money laundering, racketeering, wire fraud, extortion, conspiracy. You're looking at 20 to 30 years in federal prison? Minimum. Chen's eyes swept across the room, landing on each associate, on Rodney, on the girlfriend. Option 2 also exposes everyone in this room who facilitated or benefited from these crimes. Your entire crew becomes vulnerable to prosecution. Their families lose protection. Their assets get seized. He closed the folder with a soft thud. So the question becomes, Mr. Spence, do you take the mercy you never showed your pregnant wife, or do you destroy everyone who ever trusted you? Lexi felt something he hadn't felt in years. Genuine fear. Not fear of violence, not fear of death, but fear of complete and total powerlessness. The weak woman he'd dismissed, the ordinary girl he'd divorced, the liability he'd laughed at while wine dripped down her face. She was the architect of everything. Everything he thought he'd built. Every dollar he thought he'd earned. Every piece of power he thought he'd claimed. It was all hers. Had always been hers. Wait. Lexi heard himself say, his voice unfamiliar. Desperate. We can negotiate. We can work something out. Lillian, please. I can change. I can. Lillian stepped forward, wine still staining her white dress, her hand still protective over her belly. Her voice was quiet, final, like closing a door that would never open again. You chose to pour wine on a pregnant woman rather than be a father. You chose to laugh rather than protect. You chose cruelty every single time character was an option. Her eyes held his, cold, unwavering. You'll never hold our daughter Lexi. You'll never know her name. You'll never see her first steps or hear her first words. And every day you work in that office, my office, you'll sit in that chair and you'll remember what your cruelty cost you. She turned toward the elevator, Chen following, federal agents already processing evidence around them. Sign the papers by morning, or face the consequences. The elevator doors opened, closed, and she was gone. Lexi stood in the ruins of his penthouse, his empire, surrounded by terrified associates and federal agents cataloging his fall. He'd spent years believing power came from fear, from violence, from making people submit. But real power, the kind that actually mattered, was control of the systems themselves. And he'd never controlled anything at all. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.